Hi, this is Tana Wojczuk, and the author of the forthcoming book, Lady Romeo, uh, The Radical and Revolutionary Life of Charlotte Cushman. As you can see, I have a virtual backdrop. I wanted to come to you from one of my favorite places, the outdoor Mary Rippon Theater in Boulder, where I've seen so many Shakespeare performances and grew up with a love of Shakespeare. So I wanted to talk first about how I first came across Charlotte Cushman and her story, because she is no longer very well known, although at one point she was probably one of the most famous people in the world and definitely a household name. I've always been interested in theater, as I said, and in Shakespeare, partly because of the CU Boulder Colorado Shakespeare Festival. And I started doing some research into American Shakespeare, and particularly gender bending in Shakespeare. I love the characters like Viola, who become a boy and go out into the world and can have all of these adventures dressed as a man. And I found out that plenty of women actually played Shakespeare's male characters like Hamlet and Romeo in the 17th and 18th centuries. And Cushman was one of them. And I got really excited about her because, unlike many of these other actresses who did great renditions of Hamlet, for example, Cushman didn't do it as a kind of a titillation. It wasn't sort of to see a woman wearing tights, which the audiences liked. It was very believable. And so I started to wonder, how did this woman become this massive celebrity in the 19th century playing male roles? And I realized there's something I'm missing here about American culture at that time and about Cushman herself, and what she did that so attracted her audiences. And she just seemed like a really amazing, unique person. And then I looked deeper and I found out that, she not only played men on stage, she often dressed as a man off stage. She lived with female partners and fairly openly, although the press didn't explicitly talk about her sexuality, as they didn't really talk about most people's sexuality at the time. But she did live with her female partners. And, I would call her now a queer icon. She was somebody who was beloved and a sex symbol for women, especially when she played Romeo, and was beloved by men, and male critics called her a better man than most men. So the fact that her audiences fell in love with her playing men and found her a believable man tells us that there's something more going on. So I think one of the reasons that Cushman is not more well known today is partly because of theater. It is very ephemeral. The people sitting in the audience watching the stage are experiencing something together in a way that we don't really have any other replacement for in our culture still. And it's a really incredible experience. But once you leave the theater, you remember certain things. You might remember the set, or you might remember a choice that an actor made that was really exciting. Or you might remember something that happened that was a mistake. I definitely remember many lightning storms outside of the Mary Rippon, various animals, bats, things like that. But you forget the play. But the other reason is that Cushman, because she was an actress and the theater is difficult to preserve, was very dependent on the biographers who came after her to record her, her life. And her legacy really disappeared because those biographers, who were more conservative morally, socially, than when she first became a star. These Victorian biographers were not interested in her, and her queerness was very inconvenient for them and distasteful to them. So you see this, happening right after she dies, that she starts being actively written out. One obituary says on the day she died that, when tens of thousands of people are mourning her and trying to get into her funeral in Boston, this obituary says, oh, she was really great. We'll miss her, but thankfully no woman will have to debase herself playing men on stage again. So this sort of campaign to erase her and discredit her kind of happens right away. So it's time that she comes back. There have been some wonderful academic biographies that I had the benefit of in doing this book. And one of which in the 70s focused a bit on her career, but really nothing, ignored her personal life and the fact that she was queer. And the second in 2000 was great, but it also really focused on her personal relationships and did not as much talk about her career. And so I thought there's a great opportunity here for people to really fall in love with Cushman. And so I spent 10 years researching this book and trying to come up with a way to commemorate Cushman, but also bring her back to life and tell her story. And these scenes and these details are all from my historical research, from letters, archives, searching in the card catalogs to find gems, like a letter from Longfellow that said, "Will you please be in this play?" That I found in a miscellaneous file. So, to future writers, biographers, researchers out there, don't be afraid to get dusty, and not everything is online. So to go to the archives when they open up again and do talk to the librarians and do that work in person, because that's when you find the details that can really bring these people back to life and help us envision them. So, as I was writing this over 10 years, many things happened. I became a parent, for example, and things are hard to keep track of when you're busy, when you have lots of other, I've been teaching full time throughout, and taking on many other freelance gigs as writers do. And so, I piled the books up and I piled the databases up and I took thousands of pictures of letters, and learned to read 19th century handwriting, which is a little difficult to read. And some of the letters were written on thin paper, and then she would turn them and write over what she just wrote, called cross-writing. So, there was a lot of learning that had to happen. And in my room where I do most of my writing, I just have notes everywhere and big diagrams, and I like to get big pieces of paper and draw scenes and where everybody is and what they're doing, and keeping the timeline and all the details, basically making big piles of details that will go into each scene. So, at the time for Cushman in the 19th century, what I discovered as I was reading through her letters and her personal writing was that she was very confident, but she also knew that she had to be, perfect in many ways. And so she had to present herself as this very virtuous woman. And it was odd because, as a gay woman in the 19th century, she wasn't seen as a gay woman. And so she was seen as actually a virtuous woman who never had dealings with men. So there's this interesting sort of smokescreen that happens there. And she also faced a lot of criticism from very sexist critics who criticized her look. She was too masculine. She wasn't beautiful enough to be an actress. But she persevered. And not only did she persevere, but she, at every time she had an opportunity to to cower or to walk away. For example, when a New York theater critic was attacking her in the press, she came right back at him. She wrote him these very strongly worded letters about the fact that he was risking his career by attacking her, and the audiences loved her, and basically debating him point by point like she was in a sword fight, which was really exciting. And she took big risks. She didn't let the criticism that other people had of her make her smaller. She actually took bigger risks. When people thought she couldn't succeed in England, she not only went to England, but she also played Romeo with her sister as Juliet. So she played this. It was a huge risk, which turned out to be one of her biggest successes. She also, needed time away from the public eye, and she created this artist commune in Rome, where she could live openly with her friends and with her loved ones and her wife in all but law, Emma Stebbins, who later became the sculptor for the Bethesda Fountain, which was inspired by Cushman and her body. Cushman had a huge influence that we are only now rediscovering on Shakespeare. For example, when she went to London, she reinstated the full text of Romeo and Juliet for the first time in many decades. So she was able to, bring Shakespeare's language and his full text back. Romeo and Juliet in the Bowdlerized version. The edited version that had been rewritten in England and America at the time. Romeo and Juliet woke up at the end and there was a happy ending, and many different important monologues were cut as well. She also had a major influence on Shakespeare as a sort of proto-method actor, one of the first method actors. She really drew from deep research into these characters to try to make them fully realized people, and not just these broad types. She also influenced Shakespeare in the way that she opened up the possibility of playing male roles in a more sensitive, passionate way, rather than a sort of bombastic way, which is what Americans were most known for at the time. And then lastly, with all of that, I just wanted to read you guys a short passage from the book. It's just from the very beginning of the book to help you get a sense of Cushman and her world. So this is the book, and it's going to disappear in and out of the background here. Here we go. So this is from just the first page. The crown was made of pale green laurel, fit for a Caesar, and tied with a white ribbon to symbolize royalty. A handsome young actor carried it on stage on a cushion of purple velvet. Charlotte had chosen a simple dress for the occasion in a gray silk that matched the steel in her hair. Now in her late 50s, Charlotte had already spent a lifetime being judged by the press, who found her lantern jaw ugly, but her performances electrifying. One friend said that her mouth was like the Arc de Triomphe, both a jibe and a compliment. As she greeted the audience, her large, deep-set gray eyes lit up with pleasure. She is the rage. Gentlemen reproduce the color of her favorite mulberry morning gown in their scarves and cravats. Ladies emulate each other in exactly copying the motion of her hips as she walks on the stage, reported the New York Tribune. The press follow her from her first preparatory of her entrance to the final movement of her embroidered handkerchief as she soothes the tragedy-startled rouge upon her cheek. Now it was November 1874, and it felt as though all New York City were crowded into Booth's Theater. Standing on the apron of the stage, Charlotte could see thousands of fans crowding excitedly into every available space. The governor of New York, Governor-elect Samuel Tilden, Mayor Havermeyer and his successor, who was negotiating with the French over how much the Statue of Liberty should cost, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and Peter Cooper, who was the inventor of the steam engine and founder of Cooper Union. So the rich and famous celebrities and politicians and working people alike were all there to watch her. They stood along the aisles at the back, and in the galleries they leaned precariously over railings. At a signal from the orchestra, the audience turned their faces up. Tonight, Booth's Theater was a place of worship. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here. Charlotte was, let's see, when Charlotte left the theater, the crowd surged against her carriage, almost knocking it over. As the driver urged the horses forward, policemen ran ahead, trying unsuccessfully to untangle the snarled traffic. But more people kept arriving, jamming against streetcars and pouring out into the road. Charlotte watched in amazement and amusement as several men took it upon themselves to unharness the horses from her carriage and pull it slowly through the oceanic crowd. So this is just the beginning and the scene setting, but I wanted to make sure that the book felt like an adventure story, all true, and I hope that it helps people fall in love with Charlotte as I did, and restore her legacy. Thank you.